how to engage the global community on thinking about a few important dimensions for the reopening of schools. We know that the situation is very different in every country, and what we try to do with this framework is provide some insight and some ideas about what to take into account when thinking about reopening schools. So I want to emphasize depends a lot on the local context. It depends on the overall risk of the country, the health authority, and the characteristics of every education. Move and start the presentation now. So I think that we need to ourselves, although we are all it, is that the pandemic that we're facing in the world, it's an and the well-being. Many of those risks are different in different countries, but in any case, there are a few characteristics that are important to take into account. The first thing to remind ourselves is the high level of uncertainty that exists as part of this pandemic, even on the health side, and especially on the health side. Children, this is not this presentation doesn't deal with that aspect, but we do recognize that to be able to support countries, we need to also understand that there is a high level of uncertainty, and the world as a whole is trying to come to grips with how to deal with this level of uncertainty and the rich research that is being available every day. So the pandemic has caused increased socioeconomic gaps. So in general, we expect this pandemic to impact the poorest or the disadvantaged more strongly. Those kids, those children that, for example, cannot connect to virtual or online classes. We also expect increase, and from that and from the lack of presence in school, we also expect an increase in performance gaps, in particular in learning. We also, for some countries and some systems, we also expect poorer health outcomes that could come, for example, from not benefiting from health programs in the schools, or children who could experience some type of situation at home. And then we also have the reduced social cohesion that the schools in general bring about for the communities. So in a sense, this framework came from this message about how governments know and that they need to work to promote and safeguard every child's right to education, but also to put a lot of emphasis on health and the safety during this pandemic. So this framework basically tries to inform and bring to the decision making on when to reopen schools. More than when is once the decision has been schools, what are the things that are important before schools are open. So the idea is as well to trigger a conversation about in each country about how to support national and subnational preparations for school reopening. What are the type of things that we thought countries could benefit to their schools, districts, or whatever other administration arrangements that exist in the country, and then also to guide a little bit of implementation. The framework have also started to actually come down to the of each country's education system. So why to reopen schools? So I think this is something that we all know, but it is very the first point is going to be that there is a big disruption to instructional time that will have a severe impact on the ability to learn for children. So, so as the pandemic advances and some types of lockdowns or distancing arrangements are in place, we expect that to have longer effects on the ability for children to learn. The developmental needs of children continue to be there despite all the things that are happening. A second point that is very important is that, and we know this from a lot of research on out of school in many countries, is that the longer children are out of school, the less likely they are to return to school. So it is very important that we take this into account, and we'll discuss some strategies for that. At the same time, we have seen in many at the global level that being out of school increases for violence in the household and other risk factors for children. School closures could generate mental health, stress, anxiety, some other behavioral issues in children, but also it's important to take into account the mental health effects on teachers and administrators who are not who are also experiencing this type of impacts. We also have seen in many countries already that negative impacts are more pronounced for disadvantaged and marginalized children. So if they were marginalized already for different circumstances, we expect them to be even more marginalized once the new normal starts playing into context. So a little bit of the message of the framework is also to keep in mind and keep a specific focus who because for them it would be harder to come back to the systems. They are more likely to be affected by other instances and household income and other situations. On the school reopening, the idea is to have a safe and consistent school reopening. And consistency with what? So the consistency should go with the government's or the country's COVID-19 health response. So most countries have developed their plans on how to combat COVID at the national level through different measures. So a little bit of this issue that we talk about, contextualization, has to do with also what is the overall response of the country and how opening schools will fit in that picture. So those are just a few very important reasons, not the only ones, on why reopening schools. Let me advance. So when, where, and which schools to reopen? That is the kind of questions that our institution has been asked on our work in the world on school reopening. So we have divided the framework in three parts with three key messages. The first one is that it is important to assess how learning and well-being can be supported in each context. So and when we mention it context, it's not only context of the country, but also the characteristics of that system. Has that system moved towards a remote learning, to blended, whether the plan is to move towards a blended a strategy where some of the classes are remote and some others are face-to-face. The first message of this slide is gather information. It is very important, and that's our suggestion, to try to do some types of quick surveys from different stakeholders about how the learning and well-being of children, teachers, parents is being used, and bank and other institutions, as well as many other, as well as countries have experience with this. The second one is to analyze the benefits of classrooms-based instructions versus remote learning. So once the pandemic hit, what we observe is that most countries, from the poorest country to the richest country, started moving or speeding up strategies where remote learning was more prevalent, understandably. What we have seen a little bit less is analysis of the benefits and even the engagements of kids through remote learning. And the idea is to see how much learning has happened, how many hours kids are engaging with the content, and these sort of things that would help us paint a better picture once schools reopen, and that can feed into the plans where perhaps social distancing will impose some restriction on the amount of hours or days that some kids would be able to attend school. And then the third one, where we frame this framework, is evaluate the risk associated to reopening of schools. And when by risk we mean first one, the health risk, but also any other risk to learning, any other risk to teachers, the risk to parents, the risk of learning, and the risk or the risk of not learning. All of these, or all these three aspects, as I put here to the right, are very important to take into account the context. The context is going to be extremely key. The context of the system, the context of the pandemic in the country, the context on how that pandemic is advancing. So on this, so the framework does is to start asking a few questions, give a few recommendations for topics to discuss. On that first double arrow that we see, some of the questions that are important to ask are things like, is the remote learning high quality? Is it accessible and available for all? And we want to say all because we know that in most countries there is always like a digital gap that is usually associated with poverty, with disadvantage. So it is important to know whether accessibility and availability is there, but also the quality of that access and material. One other question that is important that I think countries have started to realize is how long the current remote learning approach can be sustained. Some countries have already, even before the pandemic, some plans to expand their remote learning approaches. Some others are new to this approach, and it is very important to understand whether this strategy can be sustained. And it is important because we don't really know how the pandemic is going to behave in different countries. And it is important to see the capacity of the system to sustain it, but also to integrate it in the future. Many countries are thinking of this pandemic as an opportunity to actually modernize a little bit the teaching, learning, and engagement processes. So understanding the sustainability and how sustained it can be could be very beneficial for those efforts. One very, very big aspect is how teachers are doing, how we can support them to adapt to different administrative but also learning approaches, how are the strategies for engaging a teacher, a student, based on whatever decision on technology that has been made to expand the services. Fourth is a question about whether there are protection-related risk related to children not attending to school. So it is important that in some parts of different countries, children have more risk of staying at home, perhaps because parents cannot take care of children during their work time, perhaps due to poverty. They wouldn't have the opportunity to link or to connect to different types of distance learning. So another question is, do school closures compromise other essential services? So what we see in the world is that many kids and many schools and systems use schools as a way to deliver other essential services, such as school feeding, immunization campaigns for other diseases, some social protection services. So this is kind of things that we need also to think about on how important are those services on their way of delivery for children. And then finally, in this slide, the kind of question we want to ask is, what are the social, economic, and well-being implications of children not attending schools? Is that going to prevent them to get ahead in life later, to be more productive, to be more active members of society? And then there is also the effects that will come through the big economic squeeze that we see in many countries, and how that would affect household decision making on sending children to school. On the second part, that is important is, what is the capacity of schools to maintain social distancing and hygiene practice? So we think that and we have seen in many plans that countries are developing, very, very worthy strategies about social distancing. When they have the space, they stagger different shifts. They're thinking about using other spaces. But it is important also to understand that it's not only what is written, but given the situation of contagion, of a spread in different countries, it is also important to evaluate and assess the capacity of schools to actually enforce or work with students on actually implementing those. So for that, we'll see in a little bit that it is important to focus also on creating that capacity to create behavioral change. Then the other one is, we also need to consider the level of exposure among different groups in the schools. Of course, children are not the only ones that would be exposed to a negative situation. We also have teachers, we also have other adults in the schools, and it is and we have parents as well, so it is very important to also keep an eye on higher risk groups, and we more or less know what are the characteristics of higher risk groups, people with pre-existing conditions that are very specific to COVID. One very important aspect is that we should not only focus on the school, we should also think how transportation happens between school and home. So in some of the country cases from other developed countries, there are interesting analyses about how exposed are children or teachers or administrators exposed during the commuting between school and home. And that is something that we should not forget. Even if we can make the schools very, very safe, it is important also that children and teachers and administrators have a safe commute, if you want. And then the third part is analyzing the context-specific benefits and risks. Some countries are working on prioritizing schools or components of schools for reopening. Some countries are reopening all grades at the same time. So others are focusing on the younger kids. Some others are focusing on the older kids. Um, the second point I wanted to make in this slide is prioritizing risk mitigation measures within schools and communities. So there's like some plans in many countries about sanitation, about frequently touch parts of the school, like doorknobs, like door handles that need more focus on cleaning and sanitation. And then prioritizing also areas of focus for remote learning. And by areas, we don't mean necessarily geographical areas. We also mean parts of the curriculum that more easily could be moved to the remote learning. So in some of the countries that I work, for example, one part that is a little bit easier to move to remote learning is math. So and then there is like great remote learning alternatives and platforms that support kids of different age to work on math. Um, so how to reopen schools, and this is like the framework. So we basically have the framework has 6 dimensions. The first one is learning. So we do want to focus on learning. As you may know, the bank and many other institutions have been discussing and putting in the international stage how the world has faced a learning crisis for kids that is making our economies and our societies less productive. Um, we also want to emphasize safe operations of the school, given the COVID pandemic. We want to emphasize also keeping an eye on the most marginalized kids, and then also including the reaching the well-being in general and protection. And with these 4, 2 more come. It's like we need policies that step up to the context that we're facing around the world and that each country is facing. And then the financing is important. And I think this is one of the ones that probably we are seeing less of around the world. The financing is going to be key. Implementing social distance measures is not going to happen if there are not more resources to actually implement those policy recommendations. So learning, safe operations, well-being, reaching the marginalized, policy, and financing. Uh, and then we structure the framework in 3 parts. So prior to reopening, so a little bit the message with this part is don't wait until you reopen schools. There is a lot of work that needs to be happening uh, prior to reopening, even if it's not clear when reopening will happen. Second is the part of the reopening, and then the third one, which you might not see given the colors very well, is when schools reopen. So it is not. So what we have seen from many countries that have reopened, it is not going to be back to normal immediately. It will depend a lot on the health situation and the COVID response. On the prior to reopening, the idea is to prepare critical processes, procedures, financing plans, with, again, a focus on safe operation, strengthening remote learning. And I think this is very interesting because despite we're planning to reopen, we're also suggesting that countries move towards strengthening remote learning. During the reopening or as part of the reopening, the idea is to adopt approaches to integrate and bring back children to school. So when we say here out of school children, is not only the marginalized, it's all children, because in most countries, all children are out of school, or a big proportion of them are. There are some important investments that are needed, especially on water and sanitation. This is, of course, more important to some countries than others. but also mitigate some risk. And also, and this is something that we the bank has been engaging clients very directly, is how to use remedial education or accelerated learning strategies to compensate for the loss of instructional time. So some of the estimates that we see in the literature now show that even if kids are out of school between 3 or 4 months, that could cause up to 2 years of delay in their learning process down the road as they advance in the system. And the schools reopen, the idea is to actually actively monitor health indicators. So the idea is not we open a school that everything is going to be okay. No, we need strategies to monitor health indicators, expand the focus on the well-being and protection, strengthen pedagogy, adapt the remote education, perhaps on blending, which is face-to-face plus learning, and also include knowledge on infection transmission and prevention. So kids need to learn how to wash hands, how to perhaps use a mask if that is what the country is doing, or apply any other of the protocols that are being written for reopening their schools. So very quickly, not to extend this extensively, on safe, prior to the reopening, so on safe operations, what kind of things do we see that other countries are doing and that are part of the framework is have, first of all, policy. What are the guidance and the parameters of decisions to open schools? So some countries are developing that. It is a balance. There is no clear answer about when to reopen schools. There are other important features of the system, of the country, of the political processes that matter in terms of when to open schools. We do believe that parameters should be progressive and staged, and by that we mean not everyone should go back at the same time, given what we know about COVID. But it would also depend on the infection and how a spread is still going or not going. Something that we are emphasizing a lot is we need things that people understand. We need simple messages and protocols on physical distancing and hygiene measures, things that everyone and all the stakeholders in the schools, parents, teachers, administrators, and children, of course, can understand easily. And there is still a lot of work that needs to be done. And attendance policies with teacher unions, if they exist, to accommodate health-related absences of high-risk groups. And also try to support blended teacher or support remote strategies. It is important that there are policies to protect staff, teachers, and students within the protocols. And then we also need to identify response and recovery financing for immediate investment in school, water, and hygiene. As I said, this is more important in some countries than in others. But in any case, it's important to put at the front, the fact that water, hand washing, if the context allows, or if it's part of the strategy, the wearing mask. And then review policies on the use of school facilities during an emergency. This is a great opportunity for countries not only to improve the management of the school on the emergency, but also to prepare for perhaps, and we're all hoping that it doesn't take to that it doesn't come to that, but a resurgence of COVID or a similar respiratory. So use this opportunity to plan for emergencies. On the focus on learning during prior to the reopening is develop alternative academic year calendar. Some countries are already thinking about, for example, reducing holiday time. Others are keeping the holiday time, but prioritizing the curriculum. And then take into consideration, and that's one of the messages that we are trying to work with many other partners, is remote learning. We believe that this is the time for remote learning. That doesn't mean that remote learning is going to give children everything they need, but it does mean that it's an opportunity to try new things, to see what's working, to see what's not working, and adapt. On well-being and protection, it is important and to continue paying teacher salaries and supporting them as well with mental health issues, with social emotional support, as they are also exposed to the pandemic. And then to reach the most marginalized, we want to talk about direct education funding to school hit the hardest, but by that, what we're just meaning is focus and target. So if you really want to support marginalized kids, you need to target them, usually geographically, usually by some type of poverty measure or some other information that is available. The idea is also to adapt school policies and practices to give kids the opportunity to, especially from marginalized group, to have access. That means different hours, that means alternative schedules, that mean other approaches that could be considered. And then to mitigate risk are also important. Some countries, for example, are implementing some online harassment, prevention of harassment initiatives, because that has come up also as a way and as something that needs to be battled when this expansion of distance learning has happened. Now, as part of the reopening process, and you'll see a little bit more detail in the framework, we have safe operation as part of the reopening means communication, communication, communication at all levels, at the high level, at the middle level, up to the down to children. That behavioral change. We need to train, we absolutely need to train staff and teachers on how to implement distancing and school hygiene practicing. So having templates, having not just reminders via SMS, email, different types of approaches work well. We also need to have clear procedures if there are children that are not feeling well at school, and how to deal with that situation. And then the promotion of hygiene practices at all levels, as I said, and that a big part of that is communication. On the focus on learning, it is important to talk about admission policies. I think this is the moment where many of the barriers that many systems have from all times on education need to come down. It's a good opportunity to bring down some of those barriers. And one of those with this expansion distance learning is to provide learning paths. So in a sense, what we're trying to say is, if you're going to have distance learning, how are you going to recognize the work that children will be doing? So how is that going to be identified, recognized by the system? We need to equip teachers to help the recovery and to help the students' mental health and psychosocial needs. This is something that before the pandemic, some countries have been doing, but that it becomes very, very important now on how to help teachers increase their capacity to deal with issues of stress, anxiety, and behavior in the classroom. And then something that is very, very important that we're emphasizing even before COVID is, what are the strategy to accelerate learning, and it's important. So it is important. So it is important to have accelerated programs, and there are, like in the world, several initiatives that have been shown to be very effective for accelerated. On the well-being and protection, is the same a little bit. So we try to increase the provision of mental health, conduct assessments for teacher and staff, and that's the point that we made earlier. It's very important to collect information. It is really hard to act on how children are doing, what they're learning, what they're not learning, if we don't have the information. The other thing in terms of protection is staggered approach for returning to school. We see this a lot in most education systems that are reopening. Not everyone comes back at the same time, or not everyone goes to break or to lunch at the same time. They try to keep like the grades together so that they don't, if there is someone that has that is showing symptoms, that doesn't spread. And then we establish regular and safely delivery of essential services like school feeding, immunization campaigns, and other health campaigns. And then for reaching the most marginalized, it's important to take into account the financial costs for the poorest. So waiving some of those fees could be an option. Eliminate some barriers that some systems have for re-enrollment for some types of kids that have been out of school for some time. And this is because the most marginalized would probably will take more effort for the system to bring back, and it will take them more time to come back. So here, what we're saying is that that's a need to become a barrier for them to come back. And then it is for girls, in particular in many countries, to do a larger effort, a bigger effort to bring girls back to school, working through community leaders, through clear protocols on communication, and through the school management. And finally, and this is my last slide, what when schools are open? So a little bit the message of the framework is, once the schools are reopened, we not say, okay, they're open. We continue as before, as our pre-COVID-19 world. So given all the things that have changed, there are things that we need to continue to monitor and to do. One of them is having the decision model for reclosing and reopening schools, just as a precondition in case there is a resurgence of transmission. And we have seen already in some systems that there has been resurgence of transmission, and where schools have closed again as part of the overall COVID response. We need measures to increase the intensity and frequency of cleaning and disinfection. This is very important. This is something that perhaps we did before, and I'm sure most countries did it. But given the situation now, it needs to be more frequent, and the behavior, the cleaning behavior of schools and places where children will be, it's important to increase that frequency. And then encourage the use of hand sanitizer, water and soap, and the proper use of cloth mask where matters. If part of the health recommendation says that, it is important to create the capacity, the communication, and the support to make that happening. Focus on learning while the schools are opening. How do we do it? Continue investing in remote learning. Remote learning could be a valuable strategy from now on to emphasize and help kids develop skills. Not all classes, not all grades. I think in the near future, we're going to see that not all children and not in all grades, they would benefit the same. But this is the moment to start gathering that information, to be sensitive about how this could really be integrated and how to support teachers with capacity building. Because the role of the teacher now for the years to come, at least for the short term at least, is going to shift. It is important to support teachers on digital skills. It is support on how to do accelerated programs. It is important to help them develop the capacity to do different types of activities that perhaps before they didn't dedicate as much time. There are also other more policy approaches. One is the universal promotion. And by universal promotion, or some countries call it automatic promotion to the next grade. Some countries are doing that right now. And then rethink the role of examinations, in particular examinations that are high at stake, which means that what role are they going to play in this new normal that we're seeing? And then implement innovative teacher support methods. So the distance learning is not only for reaching students, it could be also used to reach teachers and increase their capacity. So some countries are developing very interesting teacher training programs that are fully online on very specific topics that will support the recovery once the schools reopen. On the well-being and protection dimension, share clear, concise, and accurate information about COVID-19 and how to fight back. Normalize messages about fear and anxiety. This is something that perhaps many of us are experiencing, that we feel a little bit uneasy about what is happening. We feel with less control about normal things that we used to do. So all these could create more fear and anxiety on children. Promote self-care strategies. It's not only about work, it's not only about schoolwork, it's also about trying to take the time for resting, for sleeping well, breathing well, from doing exercise, this type of things that you see from health authorities. And then something that is very important is to strengthen referral systems in the school, particularly for severe cases. So people need to know more about where to go if children become sick, or if teachers become sick. And then again, on this final dimension, for when the schools are open, prioritize financing to support new recovery needs, especially for disadvantaged students. So as you can see, there is a strong focus on that in the framework. Learning materials, platforms, informations should be, and we're encouraging countries not to forget to make them as inclusive as possible when they are designing them. And this is the time where many countries are working on designing platform information, public health information in multiple and accessible format. So some of the work that some countries are doing is limited, for example, to TV, some others to radio, some others to online. So we believe that a multimodal approach is more pertinent almost in every single case, because it allows kids to engage in different ways. And then ensure that water, hygiene, and sanitation services are accessible in a school. I just want to conclude thanking you for the opportunity to have this conversation. I'm including the link to where you can find the framework. It is very short. It's just the idea is to have a start conversation on what are the things that may matter for your systems, for your countries, when we start planning for the reopening. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Baroun. Very informative presentation. And I would like you to excuse me to speak a little bit of time summarizing what you said, but to summarize it in Arabic, if that's okay for you, because I think a good number of the audience is Arabic speaker. So this is يعني هذا إطار عام للصيغة التي يمكن من خلالها إعادة افتتاح المدارس. طبعا يعني غير غايب عن يعني اذهانكم الاهميه الكبيره للمدارس، ويعني ان تكون الدراسه حضوريه في المدارس لاسباب كثيره طبعا، منها يعني توقف التعليم المدارس يعني حتما له اثار سلبيه شديده التاثير، ليس فقط تعليميا ولكن ايضا نفسيا وحتى معيشيا على الاطفال، يعني باعتبار انه ربما يعني دخل على المدارس من خلالها يعني ربما بعض الاطفال كانوا يجدون تغذيه في المدارس ربما لا تتوفر لهم خارج المدارس، وايضا هناك يعني كذلك بعض يعني التدخلات اللي من تحصيل طبي وغيرها اللي كانت تتم من خلال المدارس وربما يعني فقدت في اثناء توقف الحضور المدارس. ويعني الشواهد كثيره تقول ان كل ما طال الغياب عن المدارس كل ما زاد فرص يعني التسرب، وخصوصا ل يعني فئات المجتمع الاقل يعني في ظروفهم وامكاناتهم الاجتماعيه والاقتصاديه، حتى انه يعني من ما يطرح الان هو يعني ربما خطر عوده بشكل يعني او باخر. ايضا يعني توقف المدارس ربما يشعر الاطفال بشيء من التوتر والقلق، لانهم يعني فقدوا اقرانهم الذين كانوا يتفاعلون معهم بشكل يومي، والامر هذا ايضا يعني مهم في نمو الاطفال. طبعا كل ما كان الاطفال من بيئات اجتماعيه اقل حرمانا كل ما كان التاثير اعظم، ولذلك هذا الاطار كان يعني بهدف ارشاد، يعني اطار عام بهدف ارشاد عمليات افتتاح المدارس، فهو بمثابه الاطار اللي يمكن ان يوظف في سياقات مختلفه ويحدث ويعمل عليه كي يرشد العمليات، وهو ايضا يعني يساعد حتى يعني على المستويات التنفيذيه كيف يمكن يعني ان نضمن اكتمال العمليات. يمكن يعني لاحظتوا انه يعني هناك ثلاث يعني عمليات اساسيه ينبغي القيام بها، وهي قيم التعلم والظروف المعيشيه للاطفال في كل سياق، وايضا علينا ان نحلل الفوائد يعني التعليم الحضوري في مقابل التعليم عن بعد، وايضا نقوم المخاطر التي يمكن ان تصاحب افتتاح المدارس او تنشا عنها. هذه ثلاث يعني عمليات اساسيه اكد عليها الاطار. فيما يتعلق مثلا بتقييم الظروف المعيشيه في كل سياق، يعني علينا ان نعتقد هناك تعليم عن بعد جيد يستطيع الاطفال الوصول اليه، وما مقدره المعلمين ومهارتهم واستعدادهم للتعامل مع نمط التعلم، وكذلك الجوانب الاداريه المختلفه المرتبطه بنمط التعلم المختلفه، ويعني هل هناك مثلا مخاطر من الاتيان ببعض الطلبه مثلا للمدارس، يعني هل يعني فيما يتعلق بتحليل الفوائد من يتعلق بالظهور وقاعده البعد، ما امكانيات المدارس اصلا وقدرتها على المحافظه على التفاعل البدني ومستويات كذلك النظافه والضمانات الصحيه يعني توفر في المدارس، والى اي مدى هناك خطر من اختلاط الطلبه مثلا في المدارس وتاثر وشده التاثر بالاصابه وانتشارها مثلا، وتاثيرهم على يعني فئات المجتمع الاخرى يعني اكثر عرضه يعني اللي ممكن اصابتهم تجعلهم في يعني وضع صحي غير جيد. ما هي وسائل النقل المستعمله لنقل الطلبه للمدارس، يعني النقل المدرسي مثلا كيف سيعمل خلال هذه الظروف، ومع عوامل المخاطر المرتبطه بالمجتمع فيما يتعلق بتقويم المخاطر اللي يمكن ان تصاحب افتتاح المدارس التنشا عنها، يعني ترتيب الاولويات فيما يتعلق بافتتاح المدارس، يعني هل مثلا كل الصفوف تفتح مع بعضها البعض؟ هل كل المراحل تفتح مع بعضها البعض؟ وكذلك فيما يتعلق بحلول تقليل المخاطر مع المجتمع، كيف ممكن يعني يكون في اتفاق جيد يعني فيها مع المجتمع، وترتيب الاولويات فيما يتعلق باولويات التعليم بعد. بعد ذلك في 6 ابعاد اساسيه يعني بني عليها الاطار لتقييم جاهزيه المدارس، منها السياسات والاجراءات المتعلقه يعني بالافتتاح، ومنها جوانب التمويل ذكر اكثر من مره دكتور بارون، يعني اكد على عمليه يعني ضمان استمرار تمويل التعليم. طبعا احنا في المملكه العربيه السعوديه يعني الامر هذا ان شاء الله يعني بعيد، لان الحكومه ضمنت يعني حتى يعني من يعملون في القطاع الخاص، ولكن ايضا هو يعني وارد الاحتمال هذا ربما بشكل اخر. ايضا التنفيذ الامن للعمليات، وايضا التركيز على عمليات التعلم والاستقرار المعيشي لاطراف العمليه التعليميه من المعلمين والطلبه وغيرهم، وكذلك كيف يمكن الوصول للاطفال الاكثر يعني يعني ذوي الظروف الاجتماعيه الاقتصاديه غير جيده. ثم بعد ذلك بدا يعني بارون يستعرض يعني هل يعني الاساسيات السته او الاعتبارات السته هذه بدا يتحدث عنها على 3 مراحل: مرحله التخطيط قبل يعني عوده المدارس للعمل، ومرحله يعني في اثناء عمليه يعني عوده المدارس للعمل، ثم بعد ذلك يعني المرحله التي تلي مرحله يعني عوده المدارس للعمل. وبدا يعني يضع التفاصيل، يعني تحدث عن التفاصيل في كل مرحله من المراحل الثلاث، سواء في مرحله التخطيط او في مرحله التنفيذ او في مرحله التطوير. بدا يتحدث عن الخطوات الثلاث والتفاصيل المختلفه فيها. طبعا الاطار مترجم، وهو طبعا مشاركه مترجم، ورابط الترجمه موجود في موقع الويبينار، بالامكان يعني الاستفاده منه. واذا سمحتوا لنا طبعا لا زلت انا اقول يعني الاسئله نحاول نضع الاسئله تضاف الشات نستفيد منها، لكن لعلنا يعني نبدا في يعني طرح الاسئله التي يعني وردت في الشات. So Juan, I summarized your for informative presentation in Arabic language for the audience. And now we shall start by asking some of the questions that I received from the audience, from the participant via the chat. For example, here is a question saying, we have read the following, we had read and followed the bubble policy done in schools in Britain. Did it work? What are the advices concerning the student activities? For example, are there specific tips that you can say about this point? Juan?
Sorry, I didn't get the question. So activities for what?
Have you heard me? Yeah. Did I need to say it again?
Yeah, I saw the question. So basically, what some education systems are trying to do is to create this concept of bubble, where they either create like a bubble, which is just a group of kids that try to be together and interact with each other, but not outside the bubble. So we can create that with neighborhoods as well. So some neighborhoods are doing that in the US, for example. And then within that bubble, they are allowed to do almost everything. It's like a restricted kind of back to normality type of thing. And you can do anything within that bubble with a little less limitation on activities and things like that. And basically, almost any activity would be allowed that is not, like large engagements of people in closed doors. So the idea would be just to allow kids a little bit more flexibility and interaction with their peers, but with a limited number of peers. Yeah.
Okay. Also, here is a question about the number of students. I mean, schools normally are crowded with students. How to manage the large number of students within the classroom? What policies there, for example, of shifting times of lessons and such things?
Yeah, so in general, what they are doing, for example, in some thing in China and in other countries, I was reading the other day, they are limiting the number. I mean, don't quote me on the country, but they are limiting the number of students that can be like in the playground together to 6. So for example, in the cafeteria, where I see another question, they are like using like plastic screens, and then it's like an individual part because that's where kids will not use a mask, for example. So in some others where you have a lot of kids, what they're doing is just asking some students to come for 2 days only. Basically, they take turns into going to a school. All of these strategies need to be, as I mentioned in the presentation, considered and within the context and the capacity and the financing that is available. Because if you're going to have like split your classroom, for example, and try to maintain your same curriculum, you're going to need the dole of teachers, right? So that's why we are also advocating for having accelerated programs and prioritization of the curriculum. So you can not completely double them, but actually try just to adapt what the resources that you have to the conditions that are there. I think I answered it.
Yeah. Thank you, Juan. Here is a question saying, what if parents and the students choose not to go to school because the fair is abandoned? Yeah,
So I think this is a very important concern in every single country, from the poorest country in the world to the richest one. And that's why we emphasize 2 points. One is communications, so that when a decision is made, parents understand what the risks are, what the risks are not. That we and the other point is to try to cater to those kids that decided not to come to school for fear of contagion through distance learning and other methods, but in general distance learning. So parents will feel much better if they are engaged, and if they feel also that even if they decide not to send kids to school, that they will be supported. So as the pandemic subsides, then the parents will start sending back to school. But what we should not forget is that even if parents do not feel feel fearful about sending kids back to school, education systems in this modern COVID world will need to try to support those kids in schools, because in some countries we do expect many parents of contagion.
Yeah, I think this is a real concern. That's why some countries announced that attending the schools each fall will be mandatory. I think the UK government announced, said something like that. I mean, can the education policy go to such a stage that saying, reminding that attending schools is a mandatory?
Can you repeat the question? It cut off. Sorry.
Yeah, I think this is a real concern and might cause really concerns among education politics, I can say. That's why I think the UK government.
Hello?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, now I can hear you.
Yeah.
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, this is a cause of concern. That's why I think the UK government announced that attending the schools will be mandatory for next fall.
So I think that we will think that is what is going to happen. There is going to be instructions and mandates about them. I think in any case it is important to reach out to parents to understand their concerns, so that if those mandates come and they understand that the schools are safe, that protocols are being implemented, and that the system is actually taking very seriously the safety. So I think if parents see that, they would be way more likely to send their kids to school.
Yeah, I mean, what I try to say is that can education policy go to such a point that to announce that attending a school is mandatory?
Yeah, I mean, it could. I mean, certainly, but I think that I think what is going to happen, and this is just a personal opinion from what we see, is if parents are fearful for the safety of their kids, they might not comply, right? So, especially on the early days. So you might find in a situation that despite a mandate, there are still like a proportion that don't go to school. So in a sense, that's why engagement and clear communication is important as well, to listen and accommodate some of the concerns of parents. Some of those concerns might be fixed with some of the beefing up or outlining a little bit more, for example, strengthening communication or incorporating some other protocols that would make a larger proportion of parents more willing to send their kids to school.
Yeah. How about the entrance to grade 1 specifically? Kids that were just starting their schooling or at grade 1. To what extent do we expect the attendance for grade 1 for this year, I mean school entrance to be low compared to previous years?
So in fact, the bank has some estimates on increases on learning poverty. I'm not sure if the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is part of those estimations. It might be, so we could check with Laura. But in general, that would give you a very good sense of what is the kind of dropout, if you want, although these kids are not in school necessarily. That you can expect, not only because of the fear of contagion, but also because some economic impact that could be felt for families. So in other countries, for example, some of the estimations range from 5% to 25% of kids that will not return, and I think it's safe to assume that especially for those younger kids, those rates might be a little higher. Because they are like smaller kids, you know. So yeah. Again, I think the message is that communication is key. Communication. I think that parents understand that this is not a problem that is solved by one institution or the other. I think like listening to the concerns of parents, listening to the concerns of teachers, is going to help a lot on defining protocols. And also for their implementation, because at the end of the day, the ones that are going to implement the protocols are teachers and administrators. So it's important to take on board, we think, the
Hello?
Yes, I'm here. Could you hear my answer?
Yes. Do you have any estimates that, I mean, for intake rates will be slower for the pandemic?
We do believe that enrollment rates are going to be lower everywhere. Yes. So, and it would depend on the strengthening of the system. It would depend on the economic impact. It would depend on the other equation, on how fearful are families of the pandemic contagion. Yeah, we do believe that. We have some estimations that the bank has produced that we can share. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. My colleague Abdullah, noticing that your the model or framework is not emphasizing enough the role of the various staff working within the school administrators, teachers, and the counselors, and the other support services within the schools.
Yeah, so I think that is a very good point. I think that if we have a revision of it, that is something that we might emphasize a little bit more explicitly. We do have like mention to mental health because, so in general, we write it in a general framework to try to to make it relevant for many systems, right? So, but when we talk about, for example, mental health and counseling, in some countries it would counsel from the system. Some other countries don't have a counselor. So in a sense, it is there. We just need to make it more explicit. Yes. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, the other question by Rima Al-Qahtani is saying that it's becoming more and more challenging for teachers to balance between the online and face-to-face teaching, in addition to the other responsibilities in addition to the pressure of managing the students at this time, it's becoming more and more challenges on teachers.
Yes, a little bit of the message of the framework is that it is very important that we need to redesign what education means in these and perhaps after. So the idea is not to give like double the work of teachers. The idea is to see how we can make teachers more effective and efficient at engaging and developing the skills of the students. And for them to do that, it is very important to consider new strategies to simplify, for example, the curriculum, to support them in a way with very practical tools on how to do accelerated learning, to do capacity building on how to use many of these platforms, and to have very clear plans on how, for example, the day-to-day is structured for each grade. Right, and also what other technological tools are we giving teachers for them to reach out to students and families? So I think that the pandemic has created all these demands on teachers that are different. But at the same time, we also need to adjust some of the previous demands to create the time that they need to adjust and to absorb and to practice the new rules of the game and the new rules of doing their job.
And Juan, as well, if I can add that some teachers might be, because of health concerns, for example, they might be more vulnerable to be affected badly by the pandemic. So they cannot make it in, they cannot be in schools. So their colleagues will be, compensate for them. I mean, if like to add, there are, the way is teachers are employed and deployed during this pandemic, would need some some research, some thinking.
Yes, so there are. So as you can imagine, everything has happened so quickly that research on many things right now are a little bit scarce. But we do start seeing, like, for example, some teachers' union in the U.S. are opposing some of the opening of the schools in September. In some states here in the U.S., they're also decided that they will open the schools 2 days, and some others said no. For the next quarter, they're going to do everything online. And actually, many of those decisions are driven by the school districts' concern for their teachers. Because although we know that prevalence and probably contagion is very low in children, or COVID becoming like a life-threatening situation for children, although it does happen, it is more important for adults, and teachers are the adults that are more prevalent in schools. So that's why it is important also to identify high-risk groups, as we said in the framework, to accommodate some of that and to basically try to reassign or replan teacher deployment with those that might be willing and able to do it. So a lot of planning is also very important for teachers. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Baron. How about compensating for the learning loss? Do the framework, even in the details of the framework, do the framework entails anything related to how to go step by step in compensating for the learning loss? Assuming that, kids must learn a lot.
Yes.
Missed a lot of learning, sorry about that.
Yeah, so what we're saying is like, look, the reality is that we won't have the same time that we had before, right? So in most systems that we are seeing, the going immediately back to the normal that we knew before pre-COVID is not a possibility, given what we know about the disease. So what we see is that less time is going to be available. That's one. Second, that kids have been outside of the system for some time. That's two. Those are two factors and characteristics playing against time. Some of the strategies are remedial courses or accelerated programs. Both of them try to prioritize the curriculum. In most countries, the curriculum is very extensive. So this is a very good opportunity to focus, to rethink how to implement the curriculum. And then there are other colleagues in the bank that perhaps could have a discussion about this issue. I'm not an expert on that, just repeating a little bit of our internal discussions. But there are, in a few countries, some very interesting strategies on how to do that, on how to try to catch up kids with the learning, also to try to face the fact that they might not have as many hours of instructions as they had in the past.
Can you mention some of the good practices, bearing in mind some countries have already resumed their schooling? I think Germany and schooling.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will have to check in detail, but some schools are on the pedagogical side. We still need to do a little bit more research, and see what they're doing. But we do know, like from remedial programs and some programs in the USA, for example, pre-COVID, with disadvantaged populations, that they do prioritize the curriculum. There is a lot of pedagogical leadership and focus, for example, and our framework does mention it, to focus on the early grades in particular, and focus on numeracy and literacy. Right, so that is already some prioritization that we're recommending, but it's just one of several ones.
Yeah. Do you think systems differ from each other depending on the level of centralization, decentralization within the system?
Yes, absolutely. So we see all types of arrangements. So we see arrangements where, for example, money is sent to the school, and then the school makes all the decisions with the different stakeholders. We see systems all around the world where everything is completely centralized. Even buying a chair would be centralized to be sent to the system. I think, given the levels of contagion, probably it would be good to empower the local school or the local district a little bit, to be able for them to have the flexibility to implement the protocols that make more sense, and then to react to any spreads that could happen. But I think in the issue of decentralization, especially on education, in the last 20, 30 years, that has evolved a lot, in particular in big countries. But still, we still have in the world all types of decentralization. I think that we're still see what this pandemic would do to that process, and how a different system with different organizational structures fare against COVID.
Yeah, I think we are now, as one of the participants written down, we have only less than 45 days here in Saudi Arabia to start our new school year. What priority, should be focused on right now? How to communicate our plans with the community? How to involve teachers? In Saudi Arabia, so far we don't have, anybody to represent teachers. So, how to communicate, with teachers? How to communicate with the community? How to be prepared for, to start schools as normal?
So in many countries, and what I've seen in our experiences, is communication starts from the top and then flows down. And then it is very important that the communication in the system, there is a very clear role and responsibility in each layer, right? So I don't know the structure in Saudi Arabia, but if there is a minister, then the vice ministers, the district officers, the principals, then a parent teacher, they understand. On top of that, you can also use technology, right? So you can do things like rapid surveys via cell phone to gather information, or to gather beneficiaries or teachers' feedback. Our global director actually did that very successfully in Peru, where he created a system of SMS where he had all teachers to communicate directly with them. And they have what they call aggregators to be able to present that information very quickly. So I think communication should be as extensive as possible. It should have very specific targets. And also, I would create feedback loops as a way of understanding how much people who are receiving the communication are understanding the communication. Well, I do that with surveys, with SMSs, online surveys. So this is a great point on communication to actually use technology to beef up those plans for school reopening and also cater to different needs in different parts of the country.
Do you think that priority should be given to some grades compared to others?
I don't have a position on that. I think that given what we know, countries are doing the best they can. Some countries have elected to start with the smaller kids because they feel that there is a smaller bubble, right? So I mean, smaller kids in particular interact with their peers and then with their family, and that's it. But then they think that, for example, they also think that older kids engage with online content more easily, right? So given those two, for example, what some countries have decided to do is to start opening for the smaller kids and then leave the older kids at home or for a larger proportion of days at home, and and start with the older ones, with the younger ones. So it's just a trade-off. It depends a lot also on what the health department locally recommends. But I think the point that I wanted to make about this is that research on the health side is advancing almost every day. So I think that it is important to maintain the discussion on an evidence-based approach, and then just incorporate those into how schools are going to be open or reopen with the best information we can. And then the other part is continue monitoring what happens in the schools, because it's not only about making the decision, it's about also monitoring that decision.
Okay, thank you very much. I am using your Spanish name, Juan. Am I right?
That's perfect.
Pronunciation, yeah. And I was only now able to share my video just to make sure that the connectivity is doing well, because the scene is not doing well this afternoon in Saudi Arabia and this morning in Washington, D.C. Thank you very much, Juan. Very informative presentation. I have your presentation and also the link for the document itself, even translated in Arabic. And I share the link with the participants, and also will share all needed information. And thank you for all of you, our honored audience. And looking forward for more and more webinars. Thank you for Laura from the World Bank for arranging for this series of webinars with the World Bank. Always, we are happy to be working with you. Let's see you again. Bye for now.
Okay, thank you very much to everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
A pleasure.